In the previous example, I had introduced you to request object, and we had seen how we can use the various object variables provided by request to capture URLs, to capture the query strings, to capture the arguments or parameters, etc. In this particular topic, I'm going to talk about how we can leverage request object to capture the HTTP methods which are being sent by the application and take action based on that. Let me open Postman to show you what do I mean by that. This is my Postman tool or Postman application, and so far what I have been doing is that I have been sending API requests from this particular tool. In some cases I had used arguments, in some cases I had used query strings, etc. But at the end of the day, all those URL strings are being sent as part of get method in HTTP. By default, Postman gives us get method. So we have been sending this, and along with that, the HTTP method has been get. We have not used the other methods so far, and in this topic, I am going to show you how you can use post, put, and delete methods. I'll not talk about the other methods as of now. Maybe we'll talk about it in the projects, but that is what I mean by HTTP methods. And the request object can help us capture those HTTP methods and take action based on that. So this is the URL endpoint that we have been using so far. The HTTP colon, the base URL followed by the name of the API, and query string which contains some variables like prod ID and column and their corresponding values like 4560 and price. And we have been separating them out using the ampersand sign. By default, whenever we send these requests using the Postman tool, Postman uses the get method. But there are other methods also like put, patch, head, post, and delete. Now, typically what happens is that we use get method to read records, and put method to insert records, post method to update records, and delete method to delete records. This is what the best practice is, and this is what the documentation says. But at the end of the day, implementation is at the developer's discretion, which means that it does not necessarily bind the developer that will have to insert record using put or will have to read record using get. We can insert record using get also, and you can read record using put also. I'll show you what do I mean by that. These are just the methods that we send along with the API, or HTTP methods that we send along with the API, and the handling of the logic is handled at the program end where the API is being hosted. Now, what the program does, that is at the discretion of the developer who has written the program. If the developer wants, he or she can implement inserting into a database using the get method also, and updating to a database and inserting to a database using put method also. So it is completely dependent on the developer's choice, but as a best practice, this is how we should use it. Get method to read the records, put method is to insert record, and post is to update, and delete is to delete records. We can also mention in the code that what method an API would actually be used for using something like this. So you can mention app.route followed by the API endpoint, and then you can mention methods like post or get, or you can mention multiple methods also. So if you mention, let's say, put here, and someone is sending using post HTTP method, then this will not get executed. I'll show you in the code also in the example shortly. And we can mention, as I said, one or more methods, as this is an array. So here I have mentioned only post, and here I have mentioned only get. It could have been post and put, and it could have been get also. The question is, how do we capture these HTTP methods in the program or using the request object? We use the object variable request.method to capture these HTTP methods that are coming as part of the URL endpoint or as part of the API. So let's do some hands-on, but it will be a little different. I'll not use the file anymore because it does not make too much of sense to insert a record in a file or update a record in a file. Almost all the times these operations would be done on a database. And as you already know that database is actually the heart of a system, whatever the application is doing, whatever data the application is generating or whatever data the application is reading, it has to be read from some database or the other. So what we are going to do now is that I can install MySQL on my laptop, but that's very tedious and error prone. So what will I do is that I'll use one of the cloud providers. In this case, I'll be using AWS, and AWS has a database service called RDS, or Relational Database Services. So I'll use an AWS RDS MySQL database to do our operations. First, I'll create something called an RDS MySQL instance, and after that I'll create customer table and load the table with data that is provided in the file finance_customer_data.csv. Then we'll create multiple APIs to add a new customer, to modify customer email and customer address, to check customer details, and delete customer record by customer ID. And for all these operations, we'll be using specific HTTP methods. So we'll be sending specific HTTP methods and use the URL endpoint. Only then these operations should be performed. For example, to add a new customer, we'll use the API endpoint, and along with it, we'll use the put method. So if we send a request to the add customer endpoint or to the add customer API using get method, then it should not add any customer. It should respect only the method that it is meant for. In this case, adding a customer would use put HTTP method, modifying customer would use post HTTP method, customer details will use get method, and deleting customer records will use delete method. And after it, I'll also jumble it just to show you that this is at developer's discretion. It does not mean that we'll have to use put for inserting and post for updating. We can use post for both inserting and updating also. Let us first go ahead and prepare the environment. I hope all of you have AWS account. If not, please go ahead and create an AWS account. If you do not want AWS account, you can use GCP or Azure also. You can create a Cloud SQL instance in GCP, and in Azure, I think it should be Azure SQL database. So you can use any of the cloud providers. I'm just showing you using AWS, but you can use GCP, Azure, and any other cloud provider for that matter. Now in AWS, I'll be performing these operations in the Mumbai region. And what will I do is I will open the console for RDS. So I'll have to type RDS here and then right click and open this in a new tab. So one thing here is that you do not have to be expert in AWS just to create this RDS and use it. Just follow along and see whatever I'm doing, because eventually I'll be using AWS EC2 instance to host the APIs also, and if needed I'll use ECS and EKS also. So I'll be using AWS to show you how do you do production deployment. So if you're not familiar with AWS, please go through my AWS Essentials training. Now here, once you are in the RDS landing page, click on Create Database, and here mention Standard Create, and then select MySQL. So after you select MySQL, scroll down, keep the version as is. I'm using 8.0.40. There are other versions also, but this is the default version that comes up with. It's fine. Then in the templates, do not mention production, mention free tier, and it would be a single AZ deployment. You don't have to worry about it. And I'm naming it Python Flask 3 IAM RDS MySQL instance. Keep the master username as admin and provide the master password. And just select db.t4g.micro. Do not select anything else. Allocated storage, keep it as 20. This is the minimum. And in connectivity, just keep it as is. And in the virtual private cloud on VPC, select the default VPC, the default DB subnet group, and make it publicly accessible. Also, in the security group and firewall, keep the security group as default. Scroll down, there are some additional configurations also. And you do not need to enable any one of these. And in this additional configuration, you'll have to mention some database name. Name it as finance database, because We'll be loading this database with other tables also. We'll be creating other tables also. Mention the DB parameter group as default, whatever it is there. And in the retention period, mention as 0. Do not enable any backup. Scroll down and then click on create database. It will take some amount of time, around 50-20 minutes, to create this database instance. In the meantime, what you do is that go to VPC, just open VPC in a new tab. You will see only the default VPC here unless you have created any VPC on your own. So if you have created a VPC on your own, you can use that, or else actually you have used this VPC to create the database in. So one thing you have to do is that scroll down, click on security groups, and this is the security group that I have used. Select this, look at the inbound rules and see what is this source here. Now here the source is something sg-0f, something like that. So we'll have to change it. So edit the inbound rule, click on add rule and mention all traffic, and here mention anywhere, and then delete this. Click on save security group. This is something that you have to do, otherwise you will not be able to connect to the database. Just refresh it once and check whether the rule has been changed or not. So this is the inbound rule and all traffic is coming from source 0000. Similar should be outbound also, and by default in outbound it contains 0000, which is basically the internet. And that's all, nothing else has to be done. As I said, the database creation would take some time. So let RDS create this instance and then we'll create the table and load data in the table. The instance has been created and it is in available state now. Click on this and inside of it you'll find a few things. First thing is the endpoint, and this is the only thing that we need. The endpoint of the instance and followed by the port. In our case, the port number is 3306. So what will I do now is that I will go ahead and install MySQL client, connect to this database instance, which is a MySQL database, create a table and load the table. How do I do that? To install client, you just type install MySQL client on whatever laptop or machine type that you have. In my case, it is Mac, so that's why I'm mentioning install MySQL client on Mac. And from in the MySQL developer zone, it will give you a link installing MySQL shell on Mac OS. It can be Windows or Ubuntu or Linux also. And it says download the package. It mentions all the steps for a particular operating system. So as you can see, it says in installing MySQL shell on Microsoft Windows. So we'll be downloading the package from here and then you'll have to click on run. For Linux, you'll download it using either sudo yum install or sudo apt get install. In case of Mac, this is what it is, and this is the link that you'll use to download MySQL shell. So I'll paste this link in the description or in the resources also. As of now, click on this and download one of them. Mention no thanks, just start my download. You do not have to log in or sign up for that matter. And this shell would be downloaded. Run the package. Once the MySQL shell installation is done, you have to open terminal and type MySQL sh. And this is for Linux and Mac. For Windows, I think you'll have to open the MySQL terminal, MySQL shell terminal. So once you enter, it will take you to the MySQL sh or MySQL shell. And from here, you'll have to connect to the database that you have created in RDS. So once you are inside of the MySQL shell, you will have to type /connect followed by the name of the user and the RDS endpoint colon the port number. How do you get these information? Go to the RDS console. Here in connectivity and security, this is the endpoint. And if you click on this particular button, it will copy the endpoint, and remember the port number, it is always 3306. And what is the user that you mentioned while creating the MySQL database? Click on configuration and then look at this master username, and we had used admin as the master username. So I'll be using this admin user to connect to this RDS MySQL database. And this is the port number. Provide the password, and now you'll be connected to RDS MySQL. So you are connected, and if I type show databases, it'll tell me all the databases that are there. Now, if you remember, while creating the RDS instance, we had mentioned finance DB. So I had mentioned to create this database. So this is the database that we had created, and you can create additional database also. For example, you type create database followed by, let's say, 3IAM DB. And now what it will do, it will create another database. So if I type show databases again, as you can see, 3IAM DB has also been created along with finance DB. So now what will I do? I'll use the finance DB to do my operations. Now I'm connected to finance DB, and here I will create a table. The table that I want to create is customer table, and this is the header, and these are the columns that I want to create the table with. So it will start with customer ID, customer first name, last name, email, phone number, and so on. And this is the data. We'll be using this particular data or this particular file to load the table. Let me go ahead and create the table, and I will mention the SQL commands in the file that you get in the resource section or in the GitHub repository. So the table has been created, and this is the command, as you can see, to create the table. Now what will I do is that I will load this table with this finance underscore customer underscore data file. To load the table, I am using this Python program ho04.1 request with http underscore load mysql table.py. And what am I doing here is that I am using this PyMySQL modular library, which is the Python SDK for MySQL. You'll have to install it using pip install PyMySQL or pip3 install PyMySQL. Then I'm creating a connection object using the PyMySQL module and .connect method. And here what you have to do is that you have to use this host, user, password, and database variables. And you'll have to pass value to these variables. The host is the endpoint that I have shown you in the RDS console, and you'll have to get the endpoint from the RDS console. User would be admin, and password is whatever password you have provided. And the database would be finance DB. After that, I'm using the file finance underscore customer underscore data.csv and reading each and every line, and then I'm inserting those lines as records into the table. One more thing that you have to make sure is that this particular file finance underscore customer underscore data.csv is in the same directory as that of the code, which is true for all the other codes anyway. And use this program to load the table data. Now, after you load the table data, what you do is use the MySQL CLI or the MySQL shell to explore it. Now, as you can see, I'm connected to Finance DB, but anyway, you'll have to use this use keyword to connect to the Finance DB. And if you type show tables, it will tell you all the tables that are there. And the only table that we have is customer. And if I do a select count star from customer, there are, I think, only 20 records. As you can see, we have only 20 records in this table, which is enough for our hands-on. And then I will show you two records. As you can see, these are the records that have been loaded into the table. And if you want to look at the schema of the table, you'll have to type describe followed by the name of the table, which is customer. And it will show you the column names, its corresponding data type, and few other information. That's all you need. Now what we're going to do is that we'll create multiple APIs to read records, to update records, to insert records, and to delete records from this table. Now, as you can see, we have only 20 records. Now let's go ahead and write the APIs along with HTTP methods like get, put, post, and delete to perform these operations.